Good, excellent.
All right, what we want to do is do a little bit of a review of the day before yesterday, and we're really going to expand this uh, today from the point from what we've established before. So again, we're just looking at the representations of the feminine energy represented in statue and in art, with the Statue of Liberty, the original idea of the Statue of Liberty, and the a earlier representation of this same female figure, again representing the feminine energy. And when you think of feminine energy, you want to think of Kundalini, you want to think of melanin, you want to think of the elementary or most primal elementary force, and that is the divine feminine. We looked at the representations of this in tarot, and what we want to focus on are the symbols, and not only just the symbols, but how the figures are posed, because this all should speak to us. It should speak to, again, and correspond, should speak to and correspond to different energies, different powers that lie within us all. So we never want to take this thing away from that. We always start with us, and we're always going to end with us. And what I mean by that is you start with yourself and you end with yourself. And the focus is always inward. Where attention goes, energy flows. So the fact that we are doing this study and studying these symbols, which should have an effect inwardly, should let us know that we are in the process of what? Activating these inner centers of power, these inner vortexes and plexuses of power. So this is what the symbols are designed to do. So we're going to just take a look and notice several things with the figures. And this is where we ended up last week. And again, this is going to be an expansion. We're going to take this thing to another level. You notice, just like the Statue of Liberty has the halo around the head, and Hecate to the right has the halo around the head, you'll notice that each of these figures, starting with the one on the extreme right, you'll see the projections coming from the head. You actually see the round halo in this figure. Also, notice the symbols or the objects that each of the figures hold. In most cases, with the Statue of Liberty, you see the statue and the book. In the middle figure, you see I'm sorry, you see the lantern rather, and the book. The middle figure, she doesn't have anything in her right hand, but it's in a gesture indicating that this hand is active, maybe reaching for something. But it has the lantern again uh, in the left hand. And again, the two symbols, the serpent and the double edged sword. in the figure of Hecate. You see in this figure of the world card, Saint Sophia with the double-edged sword and with the uh, illuminated or flamed heart as well. In this representation of the world card, you see the two wands lit on both ends in the hand of the figure. Again, in the magician card, you see the wand being held much like the in the right hand, like the Statue of Liberty, the other hand pointing downward in the symbol as above, so below. And although the female figure rather, has both symbols of power, both the emblems of power in her hand, the male figure has yet to pick up the sword, which you see on the table here, along with the pentacle and the chalice, the cup. All right. So we making notice because all of these symbols, they're speaking to us now, even though not from an intellectual sense, they're speaking to our inner being as we notice them. And we're going to add the layer of intellectual knowledge today. So let's switch over. One of the things that I have been emphasizing, and this is going to be major, that we take possession of this concept. And of this is more than a concept, it is a reality. That we take possession of this aspect of our reality. And I've emphasized it before, it's very difficult to conceptualize, let alone accept and take and take possession of, because of our religious indoctrination and training. What we must understand when we talk about the Bible, and the first thing we must understand is that it is allegorical, that it is not a document that is primarily tracing anyone's history, although there are some historically accurate uh, narratives within the scriptures. It is primarily not a historic document. It is more allegorical. It is profoundly allegorical and symbolic. And we must understand the symbols. But up until this point, again, things like the tarot, things like so-called occult knowledge, alchemy, these things have been outlawed for a purpose, to keep us from them, because these things, again, indicate pathways to our power and to our source. So again, there had to be this process, and I've been saying it's an alchemical process that had to take place in real time in history. So it was necessary that if this process was going to be successful, that we had to disconnect from our power, disconnect from our source. And again, it's likened to a person needing an operation and going under anesthesia so that the operation can be performed and the patient does not do anything is rendered helpless, so that they won't do anything to interfere with the successful completion of the operation. All right. So As I was contemplating this, I was meditating on this the other day, and the ancestors indicated how important it was not to just have mental um, a mental agreement with this notion of nothing happened to us, that this was all planned. We can maybe agree with that intellectually, but again, we have to fully conceptualize this. That's number one. That's step one. Step two is to take full possession of that knowledge, because knowledge is power and it determines perception. It greatly affects perception. So we have to have a clear view of what it is that happened to us, a clarified view of that, and a true and genuine knowledge and understanding of this process, this profoundly traumatic process that we went through, called the fall and captivity. So as I was meditating on this, they gave me the allegory of the book of Job. And a lot of you will, once I mention that, you'll start to connect the dots, that nothing happened to us. This was all planned. So we're going to take a look at this allegory of Job. And when we study Job, a lot of people were to this day are puzzled as to why Job was allowed to go through what he went through. So in this case, we put ourselves in the position of Job fully, and we put ourselves in the position, and you'll see why, of the God of the Bible, of the Job narrative. And also, we put ourselves in the position of Satan in the narrative. And as we explain these things, as we decode the allegory, you'll see what it is that not so much I'm saying to you, but that the allegory and the symbols are saying to you. We all right?
Okay.
All right. Everybody with me?
Okay.
All right. Very good. So let's begin the journey now. So one of the first things that was said to me was, do you know the meaning of the name Job? All right. And I didn't quite know. I had looked it up, but again, this is a revelation. So right there, I just went into the computer and began this study. And the name, we're going to call this the Allegory of the Sufferings of Job, Azoth, and the Voluntary Alchemical Process of Death and Putrefaction. Azoth and the Voluntary Alchemical Process of Death and Putrefaction. Our collective suffering was all a carefully and thoughtfully planned alchemical process executed in real time. I'll read it again. Our collective suffering was all a carefully and thoughtfully planned alchemical process executed in real time. I want us to take a few seconds and let that sink in, because this, as you'll see very clearly, is what happened. We already linked up and decoded the book of Judges and the story of Samson. And it was Samson that volunteered the information to Delilah that gave away the secret of his strength. And he allowed himself, he put his strength aside for a period of time and allowed himself to be afflicted. Same story, allowed himself to be afflicted. And at such time that was strategic, then his strength returned to him. All right? All of this is connected in every way if you know the symbols and if you know about alchemy. So today I'm going to introduce us to, if for most of us, this might be a new subject of alchemy, but it is very necessary because these alchemical processes are hidden within the scriptures. And only if you know, if you're familiar with the elements of alchemy, you're familiar with the process and what it's designed to do, can you truly understand the process that Samson went through, the process that Job went through, and of course, by extension, the process that we historically all went through. Our collective suffering was all a carefully and thoughtfully planned alchemical process executed in real time. Again, if you don't know what alchemy is, if you're unfamiliar with the tarot cards walk you through the process, and you're going to see how simple it is to walk yourself through. But again, once we understand these symbols and understand that these things refer to our inner being, the energetic nature of our inner being, we are much more than flesh and blood. Okay, Job 1:1. The first verse gives us the clues, very powerful clues, to what is being encoded within the narrative of the story Job. There was a man in the land of Uz. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. All right. The very first clue in this allegory lets us know that the statement that this was pre-planned and voluntary, the very first word, Uz, lets us know that. It sets the framework. The land of Uz sets the framework of the entire narrative. Uz stands for divine knowledge of forethought. Divine knowledge of forethought. So right away, the narrative is informing our higher self that what we are about to see, what we're about to witness, what we are about to imagine has to do with divine knowledge of forethought. A forethought means to plan in advance, to premeditate, and to be deliberate. In other words, this is being done on purpose. It is a deliberate action that was planned. So ooze or oots, again, is divine knowledge of forethought. That this is not just a little fairy tale like that. That we are to take these things not literally, but to understand that there is divine wisdom at work here. There was a man in the land of Oots. Again, Oots, Strong's H 5780, it means to counsel and to plan. To counsel and to plan. Again, divine knowledge of forethought, planned in advance, talked about, strategized, planned out, premeditated in advance. Everybody with me? Oots means to consult, to take advice, to counsel, plan, or consult together. So our ancestors got together and planned this thing out. And they're going to show us allegorically through the narrative and story of Job just what this plan was. And it connects to other scriptures. So one of the first questions that was put forth, have you ever broken down the name Job in the Hebrew? Because it's going to speak to you. So the first thing that I did was broke down land of Uz, but I knew, or land of Uts rather, or Oots, but I had already known what this was going to reveal. Because again, it is necessary that we have this point of view, that our perception is not of victims, not of victims, not of an accident of history, not of a mistake, but that this thing was planned carefully from A to Z, understanding the outcomes of everything that we have gone through and experienced collectively. So Oots means to consult, to take advice, to plan, to premeditate, to consult together. And it sets the framework again for the narrative. Isaiah 53:10 and 11 again has this same thought of premeditation in mind. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He hath put him to grief. Now, let me ask you, does that apply to Job? Was the Lord willing to allow Job to suffer?
The answer would be yes.
Okay. All right. We're familiar with that story, right? The answer would be yes. So this is not talking about Job so much. In Isaiah 53, it is talking about the suffering servant. And Christians would say it's talking about Christ. They are
Right.
they are all correct, but we need to understand that Christ just like Job, is not an historic figure. It is an allegory. It is an allegory. So just as Job suffered by the premeditation of the Lord, the suffering servant or Christ also suffered according to what? A predetermined, premeditated plan. You all got to see this.
So Eitai,
Uh-huh.
shalom, shalom to everybody. That means then the whole plan of what we are going through today is relative to the predetermined, you understand, agreement that took place, that it had to play itself out because we all agreed upon it.
That's
Is that correct?
correct. That's absolutely correct. Absolutely correct.
That's a point right there that have not been nowhere within our parameters of consciousness or knowledge base, that we agreed upon doing something that would be played out in assimilated reality, where that after it ran its course, it would what? Be fixed and everything would return to its holistic origin, so to speak.
And it would elevate because
Right.
we would move from a three-dimensional reality to a fourth dimensional reality, and then to a fifth dimensional reality. And to see, this is the process. Alchemy is turning what? Lead and base metals to what? A higher and higher and higher expressions, to gold.
Right. Right.
So this was our experience. We had to go to the through the fire. We had to go through the fire. This is an alchemical process, but it's not talking about metals like that. It is talking about all four of the basic elements that, well, actually, we're going to see all five of the basic elements that make up our reality and make us up, had to go through this purifying, corrective process. All right? And it didn't have anything to do with us being good or bad. Are you all with me? Had nothing.
Hey, Tom, let me ask you one other question while it's there. Just trying to connect these things up. Understanding that you asked a question about in the 53rd chapter about it pleased him to bruise him. Is that the same word that used in the Genesis about the bruising of the heel?
Boom. It's all connected. It's all
Right,
connected because we have to work this flaw out.
right,
So the ancestors are going to keep providing these clues to us. So what? We connect the dots, that we can syncretize this. Excellent, excellent catch there. Excellent point. So the name Job, or in Hebrew, it's Eov. Eov. All right? And it means hated. It means hated, persecuted. But look, in the narrative, it said that he was perfect and upright, one that feared God and eschewed evil. So
right.
it don't have nothing to do with him being a bad guy. So we got to put this moralistic good versus evil thing out of our mind. Don't have nothing to do with that. This should be empowering to everyone that's of a higher consciousness. And we're going to see. They're going to walk us right through this to our present day. So it means hated, persecuted. And it's from the root ayav, ayav, meaning to be hostile to. Now, what would God want to be hostile to Job for if he loved God and was doing everything correctly, according to the narrative? It means to be an enemy to, or to treat as an enemy. Let me ask you all, in our experience, now we're using this concept of God. Did God treat us as an enemy? I'm asking.
No, that's the tradition of belief that God sees us as an enemy.
That's what I'm talking about. I'm using the God of the Bible. Did he treat his people as an enemy?
I would say Cain, Eitai.
Right, allowing them to go into captivity, to experience rape, to experience genocide at the hands of their enemies, correct? He treated us like an enemy, right?
That's the narrative, right?
Absolutely, according to the narrative. That's what we're talking about. Now watch. To hate, this is Job now, to hate as one of an opposite tribe or party, an adversary, to be an enemy. Now let's go to Malachi 1 and 3, and we're going to connect this right back to the story of Esau and Jacob, the burden of the word of the Lord to Israel by Malachi. I have loved you, saith the Lord. Yet ye say, wherein hast thou loved us? Listen. Was not Esau Jacob's brother, saith the Lord? Yet I loved Jacob, and I hated Esau, and laid his mountains and his heritage waste for the dragons of the wilderness. So again, this is allegorical now. If we're trying to understand this from a historical standpoint, we won't see it. But Esau, again, represented the flaw. Represented the flaw. His brother came out what? Grasping the heel. The heel represented something that was genetic. A genetic flaw that had to be corrected. So, allegorically, Esau had to go through the process to be treated what? Like an enemy. We have to understand things on a higher level, symbolically, because these symbols are speaking to us. This is paradigm shifting.
Eitai, right there, that point right there. You said to understand, we have to understand things allegorically. And you said Eitai had to do something. Esau had to do something.
Esau had to go through this process. Esau representing the flaw.
What is the process that he had to go through? Because we were just saying that, he loved Jacob, but he hated Esau. And we look, Esau, as you just stated earlier, did the God of the Bible treat us like an enemy? And Kalai said, yeah, because he allowed us to go into captivity and all those things. So we were treated as, so I'm trying to understand about Esau.
Okay, so we have to know that Jacob and Esau are in us all. They don't represent people. This is where we're getting confused. They represent,
that's why I'm asking.
They represent dominant and recessive traits within us.
There we go. That's the answer. That's my point.
Recessive traits in us. So
that's a point there that really need to understand. And I think once that's understood,
then
it would be no more confusion about the whole idea about two different people or two different histories of two different people.
Right. Now, but we got to keep in mind now that part of that process was taking that recessive trait, grafting it to a recessive female ape or subspecies and creating another people. We have to understand that process. But the basic elements represented by Jacob and Esau are dominant and recessive traits in melanated people. The creation.
I don't think that was understood earlier.
The creation of, well, this is all we've been talking about. The creation of the aberrant man, the hybrid, was to isolate what? Those recessive traits in a population and have those two opposite things interact. Once we understand alchemy, we'll understand perfectly what has gone on. So we had started out referring to this feminine energy and how it is represented symbolically. All right? How it is represented symbolically. And each of these symbolic representations tell, again, the same story. But we're going to look at it a little bit different. We're going to look at 3 tarot cards. One is the World card. The other is the Hangman. And the other is the Death card. Because this tells the tale of this alchemical process. If you look at the Hangman, I want you to look at his position with his arms behind his back, one knee kind of bent in back of his leg that is straightened out, that is hanging on the tree. The World card, you'll see that the woman in the World card that I have next to him is posed bodily almost the same way. But her arms are free. She has the 2 emblems of her power, but the legs are set up almost identical. The Hangman represents Job. It represents the suffering servant. It represents the voluntary sacrifice of Christ. Now we're going to understand what happened. Now, none of us went through the process of slavery physically. There was a portion of our people historically that would live through that. So it's referring to a people that went through that brutal alchemical process, but by genetics, by DNA, the benefits of that process transfers to us. You all with me? Yes, no?
I'm listening and I'm trying to, when you say that none of us went through the brutal and then, but you say by virtue of the DNA, it's transferred to us. I was just trying to connect that up.
Correct. Everything that we're all connected through DNA and genetics. Correct?
Right.
Yeah.
So what happened to them from an energetic standpoint transfers to us. We must think in terms of the energetic nature of things and not just the physical nature. DNA is not physical. Melanin is not physical. The
Okay, now that clear.
the underlying reality of life is that it is energetic. The physical is the illusion. The physical is just a result of your mind. So the underlying reality is always energetic. It is always what we call spiritual. So the hangman represents that portion of our lineage, that portion of our heritage, that portion of our ancestors that went through that brutal process. You are with me?
Uh-huh.
But by extension, the positives and the negatives of that process extend to us. We get it?
Yeah.
All right. So if you look at the hangman, no one put him up there. He volunteered, and he has the light on his head, knowing that he is in full consciousness of what it is that he is doing. Has the light, the halo around the head, indicating that he is in full knowledge of what it is he's doing. It goes back to this word oots, divine knowledge of forethought. Someone had to get on that tree. Someone had to go through that particular suffering. The hangman.
So, Eitai, question. This here, although this is allegorical, but this also had to happen in a physical sense, also to melanated people. Are we saying that's what we're saying?
Absolutely. That all allegory, especially as it relates to us, corresponds to something that actually occurred in history. It would have to, in order for it to be effective. But the allegory is giving you the idea that and the knowledge that this was carefully and thoughtfully planned out with divine knowledge of forethought.
That was the point I was trying to make, Nasik, before I was muted. But yeah, we go through those. That is not that what we are receiving allegorically. We does not negate the fact that we suffer some things akin to that in our physical form. Correct?
Yeah, I see it now.
Okay.
For me, I try to keep things, as simple as I can keep it for myself. May not be good for somebody else, but I see that as what, for me and my thought process, is playing a dual role, But I understand that one is energetic and one, is a manifestation of that energetic reality. Not necessarily it had to be me, but melanated people, somebody had to fulfill it.
That's exactly right. So we're going to make this personal now, and fast forward from history to now to see what the hangman is saying to us right now. The hangman is the betrayal of what we had labored hard to build in the world. All that we have depended on up to this point during the first half of life. Now, when they're talking about the first half of life, they're actually talking about the first half or the first step in this process. And personally, from a mental standpoint, we come to realize that all that we've learned and depended on up till now, up to this realization, that it has betrayed us, that it has not provided what we thought it would provide. The ego must be its own Judas. Now, they're using this term from the allegory of Jesus. We all must know that just like Samson, Jesus knew beforehand, like Samson knew beforehand that Delilah would betray him. Jesus knew beforehand that Judas would do what? Betray him unto death. Is that not correct?
Right.
And yet allowed him into his inner circle to do just that. Same way that Samson allowed Delilah into his inner circle. Are we in agreement?
So that means then that meant that everybody was united in one holistic idea for this to manifest itself in an allegorical depiction for all of this to actually occur.
Well, actually an alchemical process, because the Jesus character is the allegory. The Samson character is the allegory. The Job character is the allegory. So
okay,
it is pointing toward an alchemical process that we went through collectively.
Collectively, right.
In real time. In real time. So it says the ego must be its own Judas. That is, and so we all must know that Jesus knew beforehand. That was knowledge of forethought, that Judas would betray him unto death. Same way that Samson knew beforehand that Delilah, she had tried it 3 times, didn't she?
Yeah.
So wasn't no accident that he gave her the knowledge of what? To put him on that allegorical cross. Thus, the alchemical process of his brutal humiliation and death was completely voluntary. We have to know nothing happened to us. That our divine ancestors were in control of this process from the word go. Inwardly, the so-called betrayal is all about forsaking beliefs that have become so familiar that our relationship to them is comfortable. What I'm telling people is uncomfortable. Unquestioned. We never question these things. We thought Job was a real person, that Jesus or Yeshua was a real person. We were comfortable with that, and we took it for granted that was what? The truth. See, this is personal now. You can't keep this thing at arm's length in terms of just an intellectual, give an intellectual nod to it. Because if this is the case, it requires more than that. These attitudes often have a significant unconscious component. Here we go. This is why the hangman is the teacher of the mental aspect of erasing personal history. That erasing personal history means erasing your human history and becoming what? Divine. This is the first step. Because if this was planned out, there ain't nobody above you. We're all one. God, the devil, Job, Jesus, Samson, it's all in me. This is why the hangman is the teacher of the mental aspect of erasing personal history, abandoning the treasured beliefs, notions, ideas, ideals, principles, standards, morals, didn't have anything to do with morals, ethics, philosophies, or viewpoints that have outlived their time. Time to kill them, time to bury them. Now, this is going to be very difficult for people because these things, again, are comfortable. They're cherished. We're very comfortable in believing that there's a God up there that is going to take care of everything. And that all I got to do is sit back and in the by and by, I'll be okay, just as long as I believe. As long as I have faith. As long as I identify with this now. I used to identify as a Christian. Now I identify as a Hebrew or a Muslim or this or that. You got to erase all that personal history because that, in fact, is not you. If this is true.
It's holding you back.
Over the
yeah, Meyer. Meyer, what did you say?
I said it's holding you back. It's keeping you from beating.
That's correct. Over the years, we repeatedly bump our heads or fall into the same painful places, and evidence builds that something about our attitude is wrong. And I would say perspective more than attitude. To remedy this, we can redouble our efforts to arrange people and circumstances to conform to what? What the ego wants. But forces will eventually conspire against us. You can count on it. Jung said, nobody who finds himself on the road to wholeness, listen, nobody who finds himself on the road to wholeness can escape that characteristic suspension, that which is the meaning of the crucifixion. For he will infallibly run into things that thwart and cross him. First, the thing he has no wish to be. Second, the thing he is not. And third, his psychic non-ego. If we do manage to evade the conflict, then the world will have to experience it for us. In other words, it's going to show up somehow in your reality. If you avoid doing what? Killing that nonsense. The hangman often startles those who are new to tarot. Its name sounds grim, but look at the card and you will see that this is not a card about physical death, torture, or punishment. We must think of things in terms of energy. Instead, the hangman has a halo around his face. His eyes are open and he is at peace. It becomes clear that he has chosen to hang in this way upon the living, leafy, T-shaped tile cross. He has chosen voluntarily to do this. His position is the yoga pose of the tree and the druid magical pose of the crane. We saw that in Karate Kid. He speaks to us of the sovereign, the king, the deity, who willingly steps down from his throne in order to give his life for the protection and fertility of the land. He is the shaman turned upside down, preparing as he hangs on the world tree to what? Descend into the underworld. For the card in the major arcana rather, that follows is death. But again, we're not talking about physical death. The card that follows, this is number 12. How many disciples were there?
12.
So Jesus was what? The number 13. 13 is the death tarot. That is the next step. And that is ego death. Death to what it is that we've what? Learned before, that we've held dear and cherished. The potential of this eventual triumph is visible to those who can see it. For if you reverse the hangman card, you will discover that he is in the same pose as the dancer figure in the world card. This is what is referred to, that you reverse the card and it looks exactly like the dancer figure in the world. So this is how you obtain the world, by this process of killing the ego and all of those things that refer to humanity, to our humanity. And the next step is the first step in the creation process, which always begins with the divine feminine. And here she is represented, this divine feminine energy that is activated through what? Ego death is activated through ego death, through the death of everything that we thought we were from a human standpoint. This is where Jesus arises and says, all power on heaven and in earth, represented by what? The wand, is in my hand. And you look and you see the circle that is around her, the Ouroboros, meaning that the circle has been completed. The what? The tail, it's flipped around. It's changed from the hangman, and he's flipped around to become what? The next card, the world card. And that the head the tail rather has become the head. This is all that we've been talking about, but there's a process to this. We're not going to do this with the mind that we came into this with, or with the mental perception. There is no God that is coming to do this thing for us. We are the alchemists. We are our ancestors that planned this whole thing. There is no separation. And once we come to that conceptualization and that reality, that realization, this thing becomes much more simpler, a much easier process. Any questions so far before we go on?
Not at all. Continue.
All right, we're going to just pause here a little bit, Amari, and let everybody, if they want to chime in, if they have questions, we'll give them a opportunity as well.
Everybody need to speak up. Need to speak up, because this certainly needs to be clear in your mind.
So we'll back up a little bit. Oh, did we have somebody come on?
Yeah, it was me. I just wanted to say something. Yeah, when you speak of the divine, and when you speak of the ancestors, and when you speak of Yahuwah, when you speak of all of these things, you are speaking of, I'm hearing, one.
Absolutely.
All of these things
are one.
Died in you as one.
Right.
And you have to be able to relate to them and to touch on them. And the only way you can relate on them as a whole is that you must remove the ego. That ego must be removed.
That's
before you can make that before you can touch on
it. Yeah, I mean, you can't even see it unless that ego, the ego is what blinds us to our divine to our divine identity.
Pain.
So yeah.
So we're saying that the ego ain't nothing but the dualistic way of viewing things that creates this, what we call mind, human mind, that causes us to see things as opposites.
That's correct. And that has to be. Hold on one second. Getting reverb. That has to be removed. And this, over and over again, the death of Jesus is the death of ego, the death of the human existence, the death of the one that was the Israelite, that was of this tribe, and that whatever that was, his mother and father, that identity, that had to die so that what? That Christ energy, that divine energy, that true identity could arise. And that is the instructive process that we all must go through.
So Eitai, so when the statement was attributed to Yeshua when he said, "Before Abraham, I was."
Right. And that is tremendous, because Abraham was supposed to be the start of all this. So
right.
He's saying what? Kill all that. And what did they want to do though? What did they want to do? They said, "Oh, you making yourself greater than that." They stuck in ego. Stuck in ego.
Yeah.
So these are the things that
Akalia. Akalai,
Hey,
you're awful quiet. What you got to say about what we saying? Is that clear?
it's clear, but I'm
You have
taking
any
it all in.
problem? You have any problem with any of it? Understanding it?
I understand it, but yet and still, you know, I'm still analyzing, going over it. You know what I'm saying, and digesting.
All right. Well, we're gonna push on. All right.
All right.
So here's the conception. All of this is saying that our collective suffering, our history on this planet, especially as it relates to the last this last portion, the last 10,000 years or so, we can safely say that that experience was all a carefully and thoughtfully planned alchemical process executed in real time. You have to understand that the Bible gives us a very short uh, time period if we're going to look at this in terms of historical time. So that why? So that what? We could use it to decode this reality. And this is what we're doing, the true nature of this reality. We're using the Bible to decode it. This is exactly how the ancestors planned it. Reading from Job, the first chapter, if somebody wants to read along, 6 through the 12th verse. Now, remember, Uts means pre-planned, predetermined, planned in advance. So we're going to read the narrative, and we must understand that this was all showing us that this was pre-planned. And if we think about this, if you were like me, when you read this, you kind of shook your head and said, well, why would God make a deal with Satan? This is allegorical. This is allegorical. Now, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, it's the Lord that starts this. Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro in the earth, walking up and down in it. And the Lord, somebody's got their microphone open. Hold on one second. We're getting feedback. And the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job? He instigated this. He used to trouble me, that there is none like him in the earth, perfect and upright. We're going to connect all of this together with what we know about this Bible. One that feareth God and escheweth evil. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, doth Job fear God for naught? Hast not thou made an hedge about him, and about his house, and about all he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thy hand now, touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. The Lord said unto Satan, behold, all that he hath is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thine hand. Y'all got to hear that. Only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So did Job suffer in the flesh? I'm asking did Job suffer in the flesh?
Well, he was cursed with boils according to the scripture.
So he suffered in his flesh, correct? The answer is yes then. Did he suffer emotionally? Did he suffer emotionally? Right? That ain't Job.
Okay.
That's not Job. That's Job's ego. The instructions was don't touch him. But we know his flesh was touched. We know his emotions were touched. That's the ego that was touched. Wasn't his soul that was touched. Wasn't Job. Y'all with me?
Because Job is the higher self.
Job.
Yes.
And
Correct.
see, we have to now shift our focus to the higher self if we're going to get this. We got to stop identifying as a child or as a servant and shift our perspective to the divine. Only way we're going to see this. If the instructions were, if the rules were only upon himself, not put forth thy hand, what was the first thing that Satan touched? Y'all remember the story?
His family.
His family according to the flesh.
Right.
Before Abraham was, I am.
Right.
But how do we identify strong? We want to go, in order to define ourselves, we want to go to Ancestry.com to find what part of Africa we came from. It's a trick. That ain't me. That's not me. This is why the disciples had trouble discerning what Yeshua was talking about. It was like, don't we know his brothers and sisters? What is he talking about? I and the Father are one. They talking about two different people, two different aspects. They talking about Jesus. He's identifying more strongly and more profoundly with the Christ, with the divine in him. This is the lesson, y'all. Y'all with me?
Yeah.
We got to see it. Only put upon himself, put not forth thy hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of God. Started by what? Killing all his family. Then touched him in his flesh. That's not Job. And that's not us. Now let's connect this with Leviticus now. It said that Job was perfect. Remember, the suffering servant. Suffering servant. The Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto Aaron and to his sons, unto all the children of Israel, and say unto them, whatsoever he be of the house of Israel, or of the strangers in Israel, that will offer his oblation for all his vows, and for his free will or voluntary offering. Ain't that what free will means?
Yeah.
Which they will offer unto the Lord for what? A burnt offering. See, we're going to talk about this aspect of Azoth and the alchemical process of putrefaction and calcination, which is a burning process. It is a burning process. And I'm talking about from an energetic standpoint. We understand that we're talking about physical burnt offerings here, but there's a higher alchemical and energetic process. Do David was talking about plasma the other day, and we're going to get into that a little bit as well. That ye shall offer it at your own will, that's voluntarily, a male, what? Without blemish. So again, we can't say that the sufferings of Job, sufferings of us collectively, Samson's affliction, had anything to do with any moral laws that were violated. Esau, the scripture is saying, we're going to read, Esau, Jacob hadn't done no good or evil. Don't the scripture say that? And he said, Esau, I'm going to hate. Before they did anything, morally good or bad, premeditated, predetermined, carefully thought out. Ain't got nothing to do with no emotional hatred. It has to do with a hard decision that was made. That we all in the spirit took counsel in. Well, how do you know that? Because you wouldn't have showed up at this time if you didn't agree with it. But from a human standpoint, you're not going to understand what I just said to you. Because in your mind, you have no concept of the eternal. You think that you were created. But it's important that you know you emanated in here by choice. To what? Do a work. Play your part in this predetermined plan.
Eitai, they got something they call going to hell for a heavenly cause.
That's correct. That's exactly what we did. See, but we were fooled into believe that well, Jesus did it. Nah, Jesus is you. Job is you. The suffering servant, that is you. And you agreed beforehand. The only reason you here at this particular time in history, you agreed beforehand to do it. I'm telling you. This ain't
the problem, but I'm saying the problem with the whole thing is that we are trying to use history.
That's correct.
To try to understand something that is energetic or spiritual.
That's absolutely correct.
And you can't do it. It ain't gonna add up.
It'll never add up.
Talk about history. Alkalis, you can't even talk about history in terms of anything that we are trying to understand from a historical point of view. If we don't understand it from an energetic point of view, it can't be understood from a historical point of view.
What you're going to see, Nasik, is once you understand alchemy and the alchemical process determines history. That is supreme science.
Yeah.
Ye shall offer at your free will a male without a blemish. This is why it was said that Job was perfect. Ain't had nothing wrong with him. But whatsoever hath a blemish, that ye shall not offer, for it shall not be acceptable for you. And whosoever offereth a sacrifice of peace offering, what does peace mean?
Wholeness.
Wholeness. This is the whole point. Ain't no trying to make up with no God. The God you trying to make up with is the one that you are. You trying to reconnect your divinity. You must reconnect emotionally. You must reconnect intellectually. You must reconnect energetically, most important. But if you thinking you a child and a servant, you'll never do it. If you think you're a victim of a butt whooping that you'll never do it. You'll never do it. A sacrifice of peace offerings unto the Lord to accomplish his vow, or a free will offering in beeves or sheep, it shall be perfect to be accepted. There shall be no blemish therein. Listen, blind, broken, or maimed. Look now, see, that aspect was what? Spliced off, grafted into another people, and expressed in that people. There had to be an opposite. There has to be an energetic opposite.
That's clear. That makes the path. Now, see what that does. What we just talking about now, for me, it makes the Passover very clear now.
That absolutely. Or
it makes
having,
the Passover make sense now.
Right. Or
because you was required to make an offering, and it had to be perfect.
Had to be perfect. Or having.
So we can see how that perfection has everything to do with your energetic self,
Absolutely.
your divine self, your higher self.
That's correct.
And it makes sense now.
Or having a wind or scurvy or scabbed, ye shall not offer these unto the Lord. Or make an offering by what? By fire. This is talking about alchemy now. Upon the altar of the Lord. Either a bullock or lamb, that having hath anything superfluous or lacking any parts, a chromosome short, no melanin, that mayest thou offer for a free will offering. But for a vow, it shall not be accepted. For that vow of wholeness, it shall not be accepted. Ye shall not offer unto the Lord that which is, look now, see, bruised, crushed, or broken. Y'all remember now when the twins, it said they struggled in the womb.
Right.
They was trying to crush one another, trying to break one another, trying to bruise one another. Y'all with me? Same language. Neither shall ye make an offering thereof in your land. Neither from a stranger's land shall ye offer bread of your God, of any of these things. Why? Because their corruption is in them, and blemishes be in them, they shall not be accepted. Look, is that plain?
Yeah, it's plain.
That's
now
what we've been talking about. But we trying to understand it from a religious standpoint ain't never gonna make no sense. But when we understand this thing from a genetic standpoint, and from the standpoint of the energetic properties of dark energy matter as it emanates within the physical realm and does what? Causes a flaw. We got this thing.
So Eitai, just to try to connect up another point, we go back to Cain and Abel. The so-called the killing of Cain of Abel was the physical element, or the well, not the physical element, but the human element that Abel represented. That's why it had to have someone to come and take his place, because the physical element or the natural element that was not holistic,
Right.
they reset. I'm clear now.
You got it? Right.
Yeah, I'm clear.
The brothers just represent, and the twins and the brothers just represent these two possibilities of what?
Right.
A dominant, it might come out of dominant and dominant, but it might come out of recessive, or
Right.
a dominant recessive, or a recessive dominant. It's a flaw.
Clear.
So it has to be, it had, this alchemical breakdown had to occur. Had to occur. We see that the word alchemy has two components. The first two letters are Al, which is Arabic for all, Allah, Al or Allah, meaning God or the divine. We clear with that. And corresponds directly to the Hebrew El, meaning the mighty one or divine power or your divine source. We all there.
Yeah.
The word chem has different roots that apply. Chemia in Greek means to fuse, that is to join two opposing things, or cast a metal. Most people have heard that alchemy is about transmuting lead into gold, or transforming impure metals into to purified metals, raising something to a higher state. At the same time, chem is also from Egyptian. That is the old Egyptian name for Egypt, Chem. It's also Ham in the scriptures, which is actually Cam or Chem. Translated into Egypt from the ancient Egyptian, Chem means hot, referring to fire, black, blackened, or burnt.
Right.
Talking about melanin now. Talking about melanin. See, we're never going to get away, even though we're talking about these symbols and they're represented in different ways, in different allegories, and in different narratives. We must recognize that it's always talking about the same thing. This process that we had to go through. Now we're going to understand the science, the basics of that science that was that scientific process or alchemical process that was what? Agreed upon beforehand, planned out carefully and thoughtfully, and then executed in real time. Carried out in real time. The first lecture in this series about alchemy, we explained the four elements of alchemy. They're symbolic, not literal. So we've already talked about the four elements of fire, water, air or wind, and earth. These are symbolic. We also talked about the four letters of Yud He Vav He corresponding to these symbolic elements. We discussed that the element of earth represents body, matter, whether physical matter or the internal worlds, it is the matter of those worlds. So whether it's physical matter or it's dark matter energy, we're talking about the same thing. So we not to get confused, we all know that melanin, all of the elements, those four elements, when you fuse them back together to their and follow them from their source, it's just melanin. It's dark energy, dark matter. That's what where everything comes from. So the term alchemy is about the relationship between Al, the divine, and Kim, that is energized black matter, or the energized body, or the illuminated temple, because the body is the temple, correct? All of this stuff, it never goes outside of you. So it's just talking about the divine in you. And our goal is to fuse them. So this process of fusion, it must begin where first?
Inside of you.
Right. In your mentality. This is why this is so important, that we understand that we are not victims. Nothing happened to us. When we're talking about the physical or some emotional, physical after effects of slavery, that didn't happen to me or my ancestors, because that was not them. We live in a simulated reality. It's an illusion. It is.
So Eitai, mind, this concept of a mind is what gives you this illusion. As long as you keep thinking that you have a mind and it's determining everything, you're living in an illusion.
You're living in an illusion. And you're going to take personal everything that we went through. You're going to have an emotional reaction to it, and you're not going to understand the divine aspects of your existence.
Well, Eitai, this is another thought then. This means we really played this thing out, because the creation of a mind instead of consciousness, because consciousness is what? Directly connected to melanin. And so when you say the mind, you automatically move away from melanin into an illusion that you played over and over so much, you literally believe that is the element that's going to solve everything for you.
Right. And now see, it had to be that way, because in order for us to go through this process, we had to totally disconnect. That's
totally disconnected too.
Isn't that bad? See, we gotta we gotta understand how powerful we are to do this.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is Nezar, and I was just thinking about what you all are saying and been talking about, and I was just lining myself up where a lot of stuff I couldn't understand that Abba Ben-Ami was presenting, because of the concept of my mind before I could really conceptualize what he was saying. I had to get out of it, because he often talked about getting totally out of this idea. And to that, out of this mindset into another idea.
Absolutely. Bro.
So all of this, I mean, because I mean, you go back and you're lining us up with, you know, like Job and all of these, Yeshua, and then I transform my thoughts to some of the things that Abba Ben Ami has presented to us, and I can really understand what is happening with me.
Very good. And this is the goal for everybody. This is the goal for everybody. Everybody's going to understand it based on, you know, their perspective. It's not one perspective. But the one thing for sure is
Right.
we're not going to understand this through the medium of the mind or the intellect. That might be a starting point, but we got to switch over as soon as we can to that divine intuition and to that divine perception. That's how this is going to work, and that's the goal, by the way.
Okay.
All right. So the term alchemy is about the relationship between the al or el, divine, and the chem, that is the hot, energized black matter. And our goal is to fuse them. For that to happen, the earth needs to become pure. So what happened, we went through a purification process, and we're continuing to go through a purification process in the earth realms. It must happen in the earth realms. And we understood this. This is why alchemy describes in all of its images and scriptures processes of purification, using many different types of terms and symbols and images. We've discussed just a few of them. Processes, look, allegories, metaphors, symbolic mysteries that do what? Describe the process of being purified. We ain't did nothing but go through a purification process. Family, now we're ready. We're ready as a result. That purification is not simply physical. It is on every level. Our physical body is not as important as we think it is. However, most of us put a profound emphasis on the physical. And that is what holds us down. It keeps us dense in our overstanding, dense intellectually, dense energetically, and dense spiritually. This overemphasis on the physical. It is not as important as we think it is. The physical body is impermanent, temporary. We do not know how long we will have it. We need to take care of it and use it well, but really, we have many bodies already, and we will have more, hopefully, if we earn it. What matters more is what inhabits the body, which is our psyche. And when they refer to the psyche, they're referring to the id. When they refer to the id, they're actually referring to the S, when they refer to the es, they're referring to the essence. When they refer to the essence, they are referring to melanin. They are referring to melanin. That is also our earth. That is also our earth. Another name for earth is soil, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
And soil is just another word for soul. So we're talking about the same thing. Melanin is our earth, which is relates to soil, which is the soul, which is melanin. But is the earth, the soul, or the soil, alchemically speaking? Here we go. So now when they talk about purifying the earth, we know that we're not talking about a physical environment like that. We're talking about the inner soil or the inner soul of self. And we know that to be melanin. It is the part of us that is here in a physical earth, but also needs to be purified or corrected. Samael Weor told us that there are 4 primary elements in alchemy. We already talked about air, water, fire, earth. Those 4 elements constitute everything, but they are not the only way to look at things. So in alchemy, look, when it talks about gold, in Hebrew, Ophir, the word Ophir it means gold. And we saw this process in Exodus 32 and 20. It's a process called calcination. And the word gold or Ophir in Hebrew literally means reducing to ashes. See, it doesn't have anything to do, family, with no metal like that. All of these things are spiritually discerned. They're allegorical, and they have much higher meanings. We're going to explain this. So, the word Ophir means reducing to ashes. And that word ashes refers to it's the word aish, and it refers to ish, all right? Because the sacrifice had to be what? Male, ish, right? Y'all still with me?
Okay.
Calcinatio or calcination is the first step in most alchemical processes. It is the thermal decomposition of a material. In other words, you must use fire. Elements are submitted to fire. This is what the burnt offering represents. Superheating them until all impurities dissolve into ash. What's left is only that which is essential or elemental, only that which can embody the transcendent, only that which is essential is going to what? be elevated or ascend and transcend. That's the way it works. It can't do it in an impure state. We're talking about spiritual. And again, we're not talking about being good or being bad or nothing like that. Nothing from a moralistic standpoint. In Exodus 32 and 20, you saw it in this alchemical process in the golden bull or golden calf scenario in Exodus. Moses had gone up to the mountain. The children of Israel took their earrings, melted them into this golden calf. All right. And supposedly Moses and God got real mad. But this was again an allegory talking about the alchemical process of calcination. And he, Moses, took the golden calf or the golden winged bull, which they had made, and did what? Burn it in the fire. Then ground it to powder, ash, and strawed it upon the water, and made the children of Israel drink of it. Now, you all must understand that gold, you can't burn gold to ashes. All you can do is liquefy it. So, this is not to be understood as literal. You're not going to burn gold like you do a cardboard box or some wood and then take the ashes from that, put it in water, and make somebody drink it. This is teaching us about calcination, the first step in the alchemical process. The fire, that is the burning up of old material, especially the lost parts of our soul that live in darkness. Burning up, again, putting those things on the cross that are not serving us, that are betraying us, burning it all up. Ash is called the process of dissolution or the dissolving with water of the ash, remnants left from the burning. One must let go, listen, of old patterns of attitudes, old beliefs, dependencies. See, this was what was being taught the children of Israel in the wilderness, because they had come into the wilderness with what? Beliefs that they had gotten through Egypt. And so it was talking about getting rid of, completely burning up old patterns of attitudes, an allegory, old beliefs, dependencies, attachments, judgments, etc. We must take responsibility for our own spiritual development. Very quickly, before we close, I want to talk to you about Azoth. Now, we're still talking about the fact that this is a well planned out alchemical process that was executed in real time. The words attributed to Yeshua to himself and the process that he was going to go through, he said, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground." You got to remember that once we log on, we have to mute our phones because we get background noises. "Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone." It's separate. It's cut off. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. Now, again, when we talk about Azoth, we're just talking about, it's another way of talking about dark matter energy or melanin. Has anyone ever heard of an atomic bomb? Has anyone ever seen images or pictures of the power of a splitting single atom? Do you have any concept about how much power is in one atom? We now have the knowledge to split the one atom and destroy thousands of lives. Did you know that the same power is in all the atoms of your body, all the atoms of your brain, all the atoms of your heart? That pure potential power is the power of the becoming of your innermost. Your innermost has the power to create universes. That is the power of your innermost, the power of melanin. In this case, they're calling it Azoth. Your innermost has the power to create universes, yet you have not developed that power. It is Azoth. Now you can understand where the power of God comes from. Inside you, in all the atoms, in all the cells, in all the molecules, in all the organs, which have their what? Genesis in melanin. It all starts with that little black dot of melanin. It all contributes if you know how to work with it. Azoth is the essential agent of transformation in alchemy. I'm going to read that again. Azoth is the essential agent of transformation in alchemy. Again, we're just talking about melanin, just continuing our conversation, but giving it more depth and hopefully giving you more of a deeper understanding. It is the name given by ancient alchemists to Mercury, the animating spirit hidden in all matter that makes transmutation possible. So in Arabic, Alzabug means Mercury. So we want to get into very quickly this Azoth before we call it a day. The word Azoth is also related to the Ein Sof, the ultimate substance, again, melanin, dark matter energy of the Kabbalah. In his master work, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, Manly P. Hall explained this connection. The universe is surrounded by a sphere of light or stars. Beyond that sphere is Shemayim, the Hebrew word for heaven, who is the divine fiery water, the first outflow of the Word of God, the flaming river pouring before the presence of the eternal mind. Shemayim, who is the fiery androgyne, divides. His fire becomes solar fire, his water, lunar water in our universe. Shemayim is the universal Mercury or Azoth. Now they're talking about melanin as Mercury. We're getting ready to connect it to this alchemical process. The measureless spirit of life. The measureless spirit of life. that original spiritual fiery water comes from through Edem, vapor in Hebrew, and pours itself into four main rivers. These are the four rivers of the Genesis of the four elements. So it wasn't talking about any rivers like that in Eden. It's talking about these elements that are in you. This comprises the river of living water, the Azoth. That is melanin, the river of living fiery water. Dark energy, dark matter, the Azoth, or fiery mercurial essence that flows from the throne of God and the Lamb. In this Edom, or vaporous essence, or mist, is the first or spiritual earth. Remember, we're not talking about a place, we're just talking about your soul, soil, earth, the incomprehensible and intangible dust out of which God formed Adam Kadmon, the spiritual body of man, which must become fully revealed through time. So they're talking about this Adam Kadmon, but he's saying it must be fully revealed in time. I already revealed it to you where I said God did not form us like that we emanated into the physical realms. This is why it says, when he talks about Adam Kadmon, the spiritual body of man, he said it must become fully revealed through time. He's just giving you the Bible lesson and moving on and saying that there is a higher revelation to that, but we've already talked about it. In his Transcendental Magic, Eliphas Levi wrote, the Azoth, or universal medicine, is for the soul, is the supreme reason for absolute justice. For the mind, it is for the soul, is the supreme reason for absolute justice. For the mind, it is mathematical and practical truth. For the body, it is the quintessence, which is a combination of gold and light. In the superior or spiritual world, listen, it is the first matter of the great work, the source of enthusiasm and activity of the alchemist. Listen very carefully now. In the intermediate or mental world, it is intelligence and industry. In the inferior or material world, that is Malkuth, or the kingdom, it is physical labor. That is avad, or worship. That is the lowest understanding of these things. That you reduce them down to the fact that you have to work for, labor for, toil for, serve a God, something higher than yourself. I'm going to read it again. In the superior or spiritual world, it is the first matter of the great work, the source of enthusiasm and activity of the alchemist. It's talking about the conception that it is dark matter energy. In the intermediate or mental world, it is intelligence and industry. In the inferior or material world, that is Malkuth, or in English, the kingdom, it is physical labor. That is avad,
You're gonna have to back up, Eitai. You froze up. Everything stopped.
All right, thanks. So in the inferior world, or the material, Malkut of the kingdom, it is physical labor. That's that word avad, that is translated as worship. Back to the higher concepts. Sulfur, mercury, and salt, which volatilized and fixed alternately, composed the Azoth of the sages. Sulfur corresponds to the elementary form of fire. That is why when we refer to hail, it's the element is sulfur. Mercury to air or gas, and water, gas and water, and salt to the earth. You ever heard of the term, you're the salt of the earth?
Okay.
You're the salt of the earth. So these are alchemical elements. So we're going to stop right there. We've given you the basics to understanding alchemy, and then connected the alchemical processes to the allegorical scriptures. Just giving you some basic things to work with and to wrap our understanding around, so that we understand the process in scientific terms of what we went through and what we are going through. And the process thus far has been successful, and for reasons that might sound counterintuitive. We know the process was successful. You know why? I'm going to give you a term. Because we became more black. Food for thought. We became more black. Negredo means blackness. In alchemy, negredo or blackness means putrefaction or decomposition. So what I mean that we became more black, we became niggers. Becoming a nigger is the final step of decomposition. So when the things that we complain about, kids wearing their pants below their behind, is the counterintuitive evidence that we are decomposing and putrefying. That is what happens to humans. That is what happens to the ego. It's only temporary. In alchemy, negredo or blackness means putrefaction or decomposition. Many alchemists believe that as a first step in the pathway to the philosopher's stone, all alchemical ingredients had to be cleansed, cooked extensively into a uniform black matter. In analytical psychology, the term became a metaphor for the dark night of the soul. We've gone through that. We've gone through, the suffering servant has gone through his and her dark night of the soul. When an individual confronts the shadow within. Now, counterintuitively, do you know who the shadow within, what people represent the shadow within us?
Ask that question again.
What group of people represent the shadow within us?
That's European.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we went through an alchemical process with them, with where we confronted the shadow within that became known as the dark night of the soul. Listen, negredo or blackness in the alchemical sense means putrefaction, decomposition. By the penetration of the external fire, the inner fire is activated. I'm going to read that again. By the penetration of the external fire is friction between two opposites. Y'all with me? Friction in real time. Friction between two opposites. That what? Activates. That's the only thing that can activate that internal fire within you.
Mm-hmm.
It's activated, and then what happens? Matter starts to putrefy. Your whole culture starts to decompose. Whole mentality starts to decompose. And it manifests itself in real time. With kids wearing their pants down below with their butt hanging out. Do you understand? That is the evidence that the alchemical don't have nothing to do with morality, good and evil, and all of that kind of stuff. It has to do with a chemical process. Morals were made for the European, not for melanated individuals. The property of melanin makes you more civilized, where you don't need no rules written down. When you look at the Statue of Liberty, you look at our ancient symbolizations of us, or symbolisms rather, of power, you don't see our women holding no book. You don't see them holding no book. You see the Statue of Liberty holding a book of laws, holding a book of rules, a book of morals. Our people just are represented with the symbol of the energetic power of melanin that is inherent. We don't need no external rules. You all with me?
Okay.
So next time we're going to pick up here and talk about this process of negredo. Negredo means it says that the body is reduced to its primal matter from which it originally rose. from which it originally arose. That's where we're at now. This process is also called cooking. To denigrate means to blacken, to defame. This is what we went. It's the word de and the word neger. See Negro. That's what we turned into. And we're going to trace this aspect of decomposition, which again was voluntary and it was necessary. It was voluntary and it was necessary. Why? To get us back to a condition where we can inhabit these original elemental energies again. So that's where we're at. And I'm going to end the recording right